Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Corrupt Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2007 mystery gangster film called Eastern Promises. Now, Eastern Promises is directed by David Cronenberg. It runs for an hour and 41 minutes long. It is produced by Paul Webster and Robert Lantos. The script was done by Steve Knight. The score was done by Howard Shore. The cinematography by Peter Szyszewski. The editing was done by Ronald Sanders. And the stars of the movie are Viggo Mortensen, Naomi Watts, Vincent Cassel, Armin Mueller-Stahl, Shanae Cusack, Jerzy Skolimowski, and the narration was done by Tatiana Maslany. The opening scenes in David Cronenberg's Eastern Promises has a man seated in a barber's chair in London, and we are left asking ourselves, how will this man die in his own blood? Because, like you say, in many David Cronenberg films, he really gives it to you. He gives you some visual graphics to you that may not always be 100% compromising. So Cronenberg offers his viewers the freedom to make assumptions as well as the liberation for the unfortunate victim not expecting his fate when a straight-edged razor will inflict him in the throat, or when he tries to kick out from possible death by kicking his feet, which of course comes to no avail. The commencing scenario is just the tip of the iceberg that sets the tone for what is to be a wild ride in a very thinly plotted, low-budgeted film. The following scene takes place at a pharmacy. It is the 20th of December, just 5 days before Christmas, where a cold, drugged up, drenched, barefooted teenage girl walks into the shop. She is bloody and pregnant and is quickly rushed to Trafalgar General Hospital. This is where we meet a midwife named Anna Petrova, a British-Russian young lady, played by Naomi Watts. The young girl dies, but the baby survived, though completely covered in blood. And it's a girl, and Anna eventually names it Christine, because it sounds like Christmas. There is some dark humor in this movie. It's not all entirely gritty, too. Nobody can identify who the father is, but all we know is that she's left a journal, but it's written in Russian, and a restaurant card called the Trans-Siberian. Like an amateur detective, Anna sets out on what is a simple assignment to ascertain the dead father's identity, the dead mother's identity, and the biological father of her newborn baby. But what was supposed to be maybe just a simple initiative turns out to be all the more complex as we get to know more and more about who this mystery mother is. We get to also realize that through the translation from her uncle Stepan, we discover that the young lady, her name is Tatiana. She was originally born in Ukraine. She came to Britain to seek opportunity, better opportunity for herself. Unfortunately, that was all for naught, as she eventually ends up at the wrong hands of the wrong people, as she becomes sort of, I hate to use this word, a bitch to a group of Russian mobsters known as the Vore-e-Zakonia. And she gets drugged and she gets forced into prostitution. And we realize that this poor innocent girl was a victim of really gratuitous foul play. Two things that need to be unraveled during these opening scenes is that David Cronenberg is oblivious to his own actions and that he is much too self-aware of himself, that he is pulling off similar traits that he does in most of his movies. He really, I mean, when it comes to gritty, gripping scenes, Cronenberg gives it to you, bar none. He leaves no stone unturned. There's no bullshit from him. He will give you he will give you everything in your face. This guy does not fuck around or anything like that. Whatever it is that he has to offer to you, he is going to feed it to you. And it's not going to be like, oh, I don't want it. No, he is going to feed it to you even if he has to stick the spoon right into your mouths. That's the kind of stylish direction that he is noted for. This movie is definitely saturated with style. Sure, the plot is thin, but it's very effective. And sometimes, thin plotted movies can be very effective. This movie has a lot of intrigue that will definitely keep you on your seat. And Cronenberg is a master when it comes to unpredictability. I mean, in a lot of situations in this movie, what may appear to be a very innocent scene can turn ugly in just a snap of your fingers. That is how David Cronenberg delivers. Low budget, yes, but still very effective, and is a movie that will definitely grab your attention and will never let you go. Manipulative, of course, but effective, and does it deliver? Yes, it does. Very similar to the opening scenes of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. You remember that scene where Billy Bats gets beaten mercilessly to death? Cronenberg's self-awareness stems to the brink of self-parody. Really can't go incognito towards an endless fetching case of aberration. In other words, even the humorous parts offers a lot of dark context. Everything in this movie is dark. I mean, it rains a lot, but then again, it hardly ever snows in Britain. But, just like in a lot of gangster movies, a lot of movies that have dark content, it will rain a lot. And also, you must also take into consideration that, the movie was set in December around the Christmas New Year's season. So, and it snows, and it doesn't snow very much in Britain, but it does rain a lot. So I guess it comes to kind of in that believable way. And yes, it does rain frequently. But I guess this is probably just adds to more of David Cronenberg's style. And this movie does have style. It also, tells you, like, which people to cheer for and which people not to cheer for. I mean, there are... And, it's also rich in character development. I mean, you have Anna, who is a midwife. She's of British-Russian extraction. From what I gather, she lives with her widowed mother and her uncle Stepan. From what I gather, her father's dead. We also discover that she was actually once married to... She was in a biracial relationship with a doctor. He ran off. She had a miscarriage. So she's temporarily living back with her mother and uncle. in some small apartment. And then we have Viggo Mortensen. Boy, he really truly delivered here. He kind of sort of plays off a very similar character to Jean Reno's character in The Professional. He's like a cleaner type of character. Many times I think of him as being just sort of like a gopher, like a driver to the Russian mafia. His name is Nikolai Lucin. I think that was his name. Anyhow, yeah, Nikolai was his name. We'll just call him Nikolai. Um, he, of course, works for the Russian mafia. His name is the leader of the group. His name is Semyon. He's an elderly individual. He runs the Trans-Siberian restaurant, which was where the first sign of indication as to who this Tatiana person is, who she may have had connections to. At first, he seems to come across as being a hospitable guy. He seems to come across as a devoted family guy. He's got a son who seems to be somewhat unstable and hot-tempered and pretty aggressive in nature. His name is Kirill, played by Vincent Cassel, in probably one of his first English-speaking roles. He seems to be somewhat in good contacts with his two very beautiful granddaughters. He even teaches them violin lessons. He seems to run a pretty well-established Russian restaurant. It's not some greasy spoon joint where they practically throw the pierogies and the borscht like right in your face. No, it seems like a pretty elaborate restaurant where parties could be held, celebrations, or if you want to take a whole group of people to a restaurant to eat out, hey, come to Trans-Siberian Restaurant. We serve all the finest, greatest Russian cuisines. And of course, especially, you've got to try their borscht. It is to die for. I don't know. Have you ever had borscht? I think it's kind of like a beet soup or something like that. But okay, that's beside the point. So this guy comes across as being a pretty nice, hospitable person. But of course, as the old saying goes, he may appear nice on the outside with a very successful restaurant, but deep down inside, this whole restaurant business is just a cover-up, because deep down inside, he's actually a pretty evil man. And as we get more and more into the story, we discover that we keep getting this assumption that it was Simeon's son who was the person who got this poor teenager pregnant and dead. But then as time goes on, we learn to discover that even though Kirill is the kind of guy you like to hate, it wasn't him. It turns out that it wasn't Kirill that was the father. And I'm assuming that maybe people may have seen this movie. So it actually turns out that the father happens to be old man Semyon. But Semyon doesn't want to give too much information. And as time goes on, he becomes more and more suspicious that people will know about his dirty little secret. So he tries his best to cover up as much things as possible, including burning the journal. But of course, Anna's smart and eventually, but she still has, like copies and pages from the journal printed. So, although the journal may be gone, but the evidence still rests. And he even goes as far as to hire a couple of Chechens to take out his own son. Because, of course, if word comes out that it wasn't actually Kirill that was the father of baby Christine and that the actual father was Semyon doesn't want anybody to know about this. So eventually, Semyon, Semyon fools Nikolai because there's also some possibility that Nikolai also may know too much. So then we have this horrifying scene where these two Russian goons, Chechens, walk into what looks like to be a steam room, and there's Nikolai sitting there with a towel. The two Chechens go up, and a brutal fight breaks out. Blood, violence, gore, and we have poor Nikolai in a 2-on-1 situations with these two large Chechen guys. But Nikolai, being a pretty strong fighter, eventually fights back and kills them both, being wounded, only to discover that Nikolai is not just only a cleaner, he also works for some elite agency called the FSB, and he is able to tell the detectives that Semyon should be arrested on account of statutory rape. And, after that we don't really hear much from Semyon ever again. But of course, Semyon also has had other plans before his, I guess, arrest. To hide more of the evidence, he also hires Kirill to drown the baby. And this is where Nikolai and Anna try to step up to try to tell Kirill that you don't have to kill the baby. Semyon is gone. He's not coming back. And that the restaurant, the Trans-Siberian restaurant, is now yours and mine. We now own the restaurant. You don't need to kill Christine. Let Christine go. And so, therefore, the movie ends as Nikolai and Anna are no longer seen with each other. Nikolai is now the head of the organization, and Anna is now able to raise Christine. Well, not completely on her own. She still has her mother to watch over her, our uncle Stepan. And, at least it's good to know that Christine will now be at the proper care, even though her mother's gone, even though her mother's dead and her father's in jail. Anna now can adopt baby Christine in hopes that Christine could live a happy and prosperous life. And that's kind of like how the movie ends. Now, one of the things I often liked about David Cronenberg is his method to acting is definitely in your face, and it gets extremely physical. The things that people seem to neglect, like the social, public, and even spiritual spectrum, all materializes through the physical existence that the spokes of our wheels runs entirely on blood. This is something he doesn't forget, let alone something that won't let us forget either. He thinks that blood is the symbolic way to get messages across, maybe to get our attention. Is Cronenberg a bloodthirsty maniac? Not necessarily, but it is one good way to get our attention. It is purely symbolic. I mean, the death scenes do serve a purpose. It's not just, randomized or just padded on just to keep us intrigued. So now we have Anna up to the initiative in the bloody atmosphere as she welcomes a new life for this child. Her investigation leads her to a man named Simeon, played by Armin Mueller-Stahl, who runs the Trans-Siberian restaurant, who's a potential man lying in a pool of his own blood. Up front, he runs a very successful Ukrainian restaurant, but is also a powerful mob leader underground. He knows that this diary could spell the demise of himself and his entire empire. One of his cronies is a chauffeur named Nikolai, played by Viggo Mortensen, who was actually in a second movie that Cronenberg was in. If you may remember the movie The History of Violence, Viggo Mortensen also starred in that. The first Cronenberg-Mortensen pairing was that, and the alliance between these two are actually quite stimulating. Mortensen truly feels at home in Cronenberg's vision, and he knows his character is up against the worst to come. He seems adjusted to his director's obsessions. For most of the movie, Nikolai spends most of the time facing off against Simeon's son, Kirill, played by Vincent Cassel. Having these two opponents is the sign of perfect casting, let alone brilliant chemistry. They're close in height, class, coloring, and even close in age, and both possess some pretty handsome features. I mean, the chemistry between each of the characters in this movie are pretty effective. From the leads like Anna, her mother, Uncle Stepan. There's a lot of great chemistry between them. There's a lot of great chemistry between the antagonists, be it Simeon, Kirill, and the on and off pro antagonist, I guess you could say, Nikolai, who's kind of like he's somewhere in between. Number one, he's getting paid by Simeon and his gang, and at the same time also he still wants to look out for Anna in any kind of desperate situation. So we get to see the feelings of what he's going through, and the chemistry is actually pretty good here in this movie. Low budget, but lots of good chemistry. This is a classic case of good versus evil. This is a thing that Cronenberg does. We get to know who we should cheer for and who we should hate. I was actually quite impressed with Vincent Cassel's menacing appeal. Is the pivotal reason why he seemed to typecast as a villain in American films. However, in Eastern Promises, he's playing a more prominent villain because he's able to embody insecurity and has enough gusto to reveal his true self successfully. Yes, the guy is a villain in this story. I mean, he comes across as being unstable, but he's not the leading villain in this story. He does have a little inches of sympathy, being the fact that he was just a victim of circumstance. You know, I mean, his father is a creep, and I guess he just wants to please his father, and his father is also somebody whom, if he steps out of line, he could end up being killed in the process too. I mean, if he fucks up one time, just one time, it's curtain. Okay, and this is what it is. This might be one of Vincent Cassel's best English-speaking performances. Yes, I mean he even puts on a Russian accent pretty good. He's not actually playing an English guy. He's actually playing a Russian. He was actually born in France, but his English is pretty good. His Russian accent is very convincing, and the guy just, he was quite appealing in his role. Even though the penmanship has changed with Stephen Wright as the scriptwriter here, the family resemblance between Eastern Promises and A History of Violence is quite similar, that goes beyond Mortensen in the starring roles in both. Both films feature a vicious mobster involved in the lives of ordinary solid citizens. The narratives are both executed to perfection. Cronenberg skims through the narrative without actually rushing through the movie and gives great depth towards the set pieces nearby, like the Russian mafia initiation, where the applicant must stand in the nude in front of a judging panel. And of course, he also has to end up getting tattooed for his confessions, because apparently a prisoner or a connection with the Russian mafia often results in having a certain part of your anatomy tattooed. Because I think Russian bodies, I think they said something like, if you don't have a tattoo on your body, there is really no story about you. And then, of course, there was the ugly, violent mob altercation in the steam room. Who could forget that scene? The one thing that makes Eastern Promises inferior to A History of Violence is that it was way too compulsory and not as endearing and complex as A History of Violence. But aside from that minor nitpick, Eastern Promises delivers entertainment in the way that David Cronenberg has mastered. And for that, I give this movie a 9. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another review. So until next time, this is Eric Correct Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around.